You're listening to European Parliamentary Research Service podcast on the Schengen space.
For many, Schengen is one of the EU's most important achievements. Today, we can jump on a train or hop in the car to visit friends in neighbouring countries without having to show our passport at the border.
But current migratory pressures and security concerns have led several countries to reintroduce temporary border controls. Will this be the end of Schengen, or will the EU manage to preserve this 30-year-long achievement? Join us on this journey through Schengen.
It all began back in 1985 when 5 EU states decided to abolish internal border controls. The Schengen area was born. On a continent where nations once shed blood to defend their territories, today borders only exist on maps.
Nowadays, the Schengen area is made up of 26 countries, 22 EU member states, along with Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland. Europeans make over 1.2 billion journeys within this area every year.
Being part of the Schengen area means that countries don't carry out border checks at their internal borders. To protect their common space, they carry out harmonised controls at their external borders and have enhanced police, customs and judicial cooperation.
As a result of this, both EU citizens and non-EU nationals who have the right to do so may freely travel within the Schengen area. Apart from the advantages this has on our daily lives and societies, Schengen also brings important economic benefits.
But Schengen is being seriously challenged by current circumstances. The huge migratory pressure facing the EU, multiple security concerns, and problems in cross-border operational cooperation have raised questions regarding its efficiency and effectiveness. Let's take a look at the situation in more detail.
Over the past year, an endless stream of asylum seekers and economic migrants have used the so-called Western Balkans route to enter the EU. This has led 8 of the 26 Schengen countries to temporarily reintroduce border controls, a measure taken by countries such as Austria, Germany, Belgium and Denmark. But is this legal?
Actually, yes, though only in very specific circumstances, as a last resort and for a short period of time. Under the Schengen Borders Code, countries are allowed to reintroduce controls at internal borders for a period of several months in emergency situations. For instance, in case of a serious threat to public policy or internal security, or when a member state is not able to control the external borders of the Schengen area.
However, Schengen rules explicitly forbid using migratory flows as a reason to reimpose border controls. They also stipulate that when all attempts to bring a serious threat under control have failed, the European Commission can recommend that some member states reintroduce controls at the internal borders, at least until the threat is addressed.
Following this, in February 2016, the Council gave Greece a serious warning, giving the country 3 months to address serious deficiencies in the application of the Schengen rules, under threat of suspension from the system.
So is there a case for a provisional suspension of Schengen to counter the current refugee influx?
Well, even if some countries may be considering the idea, experts seem to agree that it may not be the best solution, especially given that the Schengen rules expressly exempt asylum seekers from Schengen rules on unauthorised entry across the borders, and that the EU's asylum rules require member states to process asylum applications made at the borders, the so-called Dublin system.
Experts also warn that closing internal borders may simply redirect migrants to new routes, for instance through the Mediterranean Sea, rather than curbing entries. This leads many to think that part of the solution may be in the reform of the Dublin system rather than Schengen per se, and the reinforcement of the EU's common asylum system, along with the strengthening of external border controls.
According to analysts, the complete suspension of Schengen could also weaken police and judicial cooperation on terrorism and organised crime, hinder intra-European trade and the free movement of people, goods and services, which could cost the EU economy more than €100 billion in the long term.
Yes, you heard well. But what do we really stand to lose if Schengen collapses? Let's throw some figures on the table.
Studies assessing the impact of re-establishing border controls within the Schengen area identify 3 main impacts. First of all, direct and immediate costs. Difficulties in the cross-border transport of goods, for instance increasing the waiting time for lorries at border crossings, could increase direct costs in the order of 1.7 to 7.5 billion euros each year.
For countries such as Poland, the Netherlands and Germany, this would mean more than 500 million euros in additional transport costs. This means less profit for manufacturers, which would also also have an impact on trade exchanges.
The reintroduction of internal border controls would also have an impact on commuting workers, on tourism, and on the public sector's finances, as more staff would be needed to carry out checks at the borders. And this wouldn't come cheap, up to €5.8 billion more in potential costs.
But there are also the indirect costs, a decrease in cultural exchanges and cross-border movements, a loss of trust by citizens, a loss of confidence in the euro, and in much of what Europe has achieved over the past 30 years.
These costs are more difficult to quantify, but the impact on GDP growth isn't. According to the Bertelsmann Foundation, by 2025, the loss in economic performance of the EU would be between 500 billion and 1,400 billion euros, compared to a business-as-usual scenario.
Finally, a failure of Schengen would also reduce the future benefits of the single market and EU integration. Europe is an open economic area with a considerable amount of intra-EU trade flows, and thus reintroduction of borders would affect the whole EU, although some countries would be more affected.
So now that we have a certain understanding of the magnitude of the potential impact and costs of a Schengen collapse, let's try to map the way forward.
The European Parliament has continually insisted on the need to have a genuine EU migration asylum policy to deal with the current and future migratory pressures and avoid a failure of Schengen.
European Parliament President Martin Schulz said recently that to preserve our freedom of movement, the EU must act fast and decisively. But are we ready to do so?
Well, in February 2016, the European Council gave a clear mandate to restore the normal functioning of the Schengen area, to stick to the rules, and to end the so-called wave-through approach.
So a few weeks later, on the 4th of March, the Commission revealed its roadmap for restoring the Schengen zone and ending all exceptional measures, that is, the temporary border controls, at the latest by December 2016. The plan aims at reinforcing the EU's external borders as well as improving the asylum system. But how?
To better protect the EU's external borders, the Commission wants the European Border and Coast Guard system, a proposal currently being debated, to be operational by the summer. Secondly, help will be given to Greece in order to regain control of its maritime borders and to ensure full and effective control of the common Schengen external border.
The country has seen some 130,000 migrants arrive on its islands since the beginning of 2016 alone. The Commission has also made it clear that the current wave-through approach is neither legally nor politically acceptable.
According to the Dublin system, member states must grant access to asylum procedures for all applications made at their borders. Normally, asylum seekers must be returned to their first country of entry, but transfers to Greece have been suspended since 2011.
But this could change again, as the Commission intends to present its assessment of the possibility of resuming Dublin transfers to Greece before the June European Council.
EU leaders have endorsed the roadmap, and on the 21st of March, the Parliament's Civil Liberties Committee discussed the proposed new strategy with the European Commission. So what does the future look like for Schengen?
Well, with efforts to strengthen the EU's external borders ongoing, and following the deal struck with Turkey at the EU summit on the 17th and 18th of March, there is a chance that the EU could find the road back to a fully operational Schengen.
You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.